The opulent tapestries, towering stone columns, and shadowed corridors of the British monarchy have endured centuries of whispered secrets, quiet betrayals, and carefully orchestrated successions. Yet, no amount of history, tradition, or protocol could have braced the palace for the seismic shock that has recently rattled its foundations to the outside world. On the surface, the transition of power looked like a carefully choreographed ballet. Prince William stepping into his destiny, every gesture polished, every smile timed, the royal household standing as a disciplined, unwavering support system. Every camera angle, every public moment seemed perfectly rehearsed, the image of unity unshakable, flawless. But behind the gilded doors, a far more dangerous and intricate drama was quietly erupting, a war of power unseen by the public eye, waged with surgical precision, whispered strategy, and alliances that shifted like shadows at dusk. At the heart of this covert storm was Princess Anne, the monarchy's most disciplined, loyal, and strategically ruthless member. She executed a move so audacious, so irreversibly bold, that it sent shockwaves rippling through the highest echelons of global influence, all without a single public statement, declaration, or hint of fanfare. Weeks of meticulous palace preparations had been underway, as staffers and senior courtiers orchestrated the coronation plans for the Prince of Wales. Every detail mattered, every briefing carried weight, and in this world, knowledge was more valuable than gold. Access to these private meetings was the ultimate sign of authority, the ultimate marker of trust and power. And then came the revelation, one name missing from every confidential memo, every encrypted message, every secure briefing: Queen Consort Camilla. She had been systematically, quietly, and completely cut out of the decision-making loop. This was no clerical mistake, no minor scheduling error. It was deliberate, executed with the kind of precision only the Princess Royal could command, and the manner of its discovery, utterly humiliating. There was no official meeting, no memo explaining the shift, no call to Clarence House. Camilla's own staff, loyal yet confused, realized that key documents, memos that should have automatically crossed her desk, simply vanished. Questions arose. Confusion lingered. And the truth, it hit like a thunderbolt. The palace had drawn a line, and the Queen Consort was now standing firmly on the wrong side of it. The mask of unity shattered. The betrayal felt visceral, cutting deeper than any public slight. Camilla, who had spent years rebuilding her image, navigating scandal, and patiently claiming her space in the royal hierarchy, suddenly realized that all her strategic work had been undermined without ceremony or explanation. The message reverberated through the corridors of power. Boundaries had been redrawn, and the rules had been rewritten in the shadows. While the public continues to witness a facade of family unity, ceremonies, public appearances, solemn engagements, the private reality is a power struggle of epic proportions. Princess Anne, the monarchy's immovable backbone, had just shifted the internal hierarchy, effectively blocking Camilla from the intimate corridors where the future of the crown is decided. Was this move a protective measure for Prince William, a shield around the heir, or the eruption of decades of simmering tension that had finally reached its tipping point? To understand the depth of this divide, one must look beyond the polished public performances into the ironclad principles of a woman who has long been considered the monarchy's backbone. Princess Anne has never chased fleeting public approval or indulged in media flattery. Her life is defined by service, discipline, and unwavering dedication to tradition. Every gesture she makes, every calculated silence, every subtle correction is a declaration of authority and respect for the centuries-old structure she protects. Her conflict with Camilla is not a petty family feud. It is a philosophical clash decades in the making. For Anne, the crown is a sacred burden, earned through silent sacrifice and lifelong devotion. Watching Camilla ascend from public scandal to Queen Consort, through image management, media strategies, and personal branding, felt to Anne like an erosion of the very principles she had defended her entire life. Where other senior royals offered smiles, courtesy, and distant politeness, Anne remained distant, observing protocol strictly, offering no warmth, no gestures of public approval, no symbolic handshakes. Her silence was louder than any speech, sending clear signals to those attuned to the language of the court. Status within the firm was not something to be manipulated through public sympathy. It had to be earned through years of diligent service and unyielding discipline. Insiders recall a private moment at Balmoral where Anne confided to a trusted aide. Some wear the crown for duty, some merely for appearance. Though she mentioned no names, everyone knew exactly whom she meant. This principle only intensified after her brother ascended the throne. Anne watched with increasing concern as Camilla grew more assertive in protocol discussions and more visible in ceremonial planning. What seemed to outsiders like confidence and engagement was, to Anne, an overreach, a dangerous redefinition of a consort's role. The tension was not merely psychological, it manifested physically in subtle but unmistakable ways. At one high-profile diplomatic reception, when Camilla attempted to steer a conversation traditionally reserved for sovereigns or bloodline members, Anne did not hesitate for a single second. She intervened seamlessly, redirecting the dialogue and placing the consort firmly back within her boundaries. To Anne, this was not cruelty. It was structural correction, necessary to preserve the integrity of the institution. Behind closed doors, Anne voiced growing concerns that the hierarchy was being blurred by those who failed to respect centuries of tradition. These discussions escalated during confidential meetings with Prince William, where Anne warned that granting Camilla excessive influence over ceremonial and coronation planning could destabilize the monarchy for generations. These were conversations not of retribution, but of protection, a quiet revolution aimed at shielding the crown from personal agendas. Anne's strategy was simple: the future king must stand firm, guided by tradition, not overshadowed by those seeking to rewrite their roles for personal gain. For public perception, Anne's message was uncompromising. The crown is duty, not stagecraft, and anyone attempting to exploit it for personal influence must be restrained. Inside Clarence House, the air itself is said to be heavy, thick with centuries of secrets and history, with every painting, every artifact seeming to watch the present critically. On a late afternoon just weeks ago, that weight became nearly suffocating. Prince William entered not as a polite stepson or grieving son, but as the Prince of Wales, heir to the throne, a man who had decided that the polite fictions of the past could no longer survive under the pressures of the future, the tension that had been simmering between him and Queen Camilla now ready to erupt. For years, an invisible tension had been simmering in the shadows of the palace, hiding behind rehearsed smiles, careful nods, and the polished choreography of public appearances. But now it was about to explode, and no one inside those gilded walls could ignore it. This confrontation had been quietly building for months, creeping forward like a storm ready to break. Prince William had been watching from the sidelines, noting every subtle shift, every calculated gesture, every growing ripple of influence that Camilla had been gathering around herself. What had once seemed supportive and benign was now assertive, quietly, almost imperceptibly, reshaping the corridors of power he had long assumed were firmly his. He had observed it in every staged photograph, in the deliberate placement of Camilla near the center of ceremonial events, in the tone of her voice as she began to speak with growing authority over palace protocol. He had noticed the way she appeared to quietly carve a legacy, one that to him should only belong to those of the direct bloodline. To the public, William remained the image of measured composure, a prince of calm dignity. But behind the closed doors of Buckingham and Clarence House, the pressure of protecting his future reign was becoming almost unbearable. He realized, with piercing clarity, that if he did not set an immediate boundary, The essence of his coronation, its vision, its symbolism, its identity, could be quietly infiltrated and reshaped by someone whose path to the crown had followed an entirely different set of rules, guided by public perception and media strategy rather than blood and tradition. When the fateful meeting finally began, silence filled the room like a living entity, heavy and immediate. There were no polite openings, no inquiries about family or health, no attempts at small talk to soften what was about to unfold. William spoke first, his voice calm, but carrying the cold precision of a man who had made up his mind and would not be swayed. He acknowledged the complexities of the current transition, but he wasted no time moving to the heart of the matter. He explained, with a courtesy that cut like a blade, that the planning for his coronation was now fully underway, and that this event was not a mere continuation of current tradition. It was a foundational statement, a blueprint for the future of the monarchy, his monarchy. Therefore, he was informing Camilla that she would step back from all key planning committees, particularly those governing the symbolic and ceremonial decisions that would define the moral and visual language of his reign. He was not asking for her input. He was establishing a new reality. William spoke of the need for space, the importance of public perception, and the necessity of a clear vision, unclouded by competing influence. His message, though delivered with control, left no room for misinterpretation. Her era was a bridge, and he was the destination. While she might be the queen consort today, she would not be shaping the crown of tomorrow. But Camilla was far from intimidated. She had spent decades navigating treacherous waters, transforming herself from one of the most reviled women in Britain into the side of the king, earning influence through perseverance and careful manoeuvring. She believed, rightly or wrongly, that she had earned her place, and she was not about to be brushed aside. As William laid out his intentions, Camilla reportedly maintained an elegant, almost frozen smile. But insiders claim her eyes burned with a dangerous, calculating intensity. She chose her moment, not with defensiveness or anger, but with a weapon far more subtle and potent: dismissal. Leaning forward, her tone blended amusement with condescension, and she delivered a single line that sent a chill through William's spine. "It is all symbolic tradition, darling. Nothing more." To William, the word darling was an underhanded slap, a subtle insult wrapped in politeness. Her dismissal of symbolic tradition was not merely a personal affront, it was an attack on the very institution he was sworn to protect. It suggested that the future, his responsibilities, and the sacred rituals of the crown were nothing more than quaint theatrics, trivial and dismissible. That was the spark that ignited a long-suppressed fury within the Prince of Wales. The memories of past grievances, the pain of his mother's loss, the enormous weight of his own responsibilities, all coalesced into a single, undeniable realization. Compromise was no longer possible. The middle ground he had long occupied, balancing diplomacy and duty, had vanished. William rose from his chair, his presence suddenly sharp, electrifying, impossible to ignore. He fixed Camilla with an unflinching gaze, delivering a sentence that insiders say still echoes throughout the palace corridors. "This is not your crown to shape." The words landed like a hammer strike, final and undeniable. There was no shouting, no dramatics, just silence so dense it felt as if the very walls were holding their breath. Without waiting for a reply or an apology, William turned on his heel and left, his footsteps echoing ominously on the polished floorboards, leaving the boundary clearly drawn. The following day, he sought out the one family member whose loyalty and understanding of the crown matched, perhaps exceeded, his own, Princess Anne. Privately, he recounted every detail: the condescension, the dismissal, the subtle insult of darling, and Anne understood instantly. Together, they forged a silent, unbreakable pact. Camilla would be excluded from the coronation planning. From suggestion, it became a surgical reality, executed with precision and invisibility. Palace machinery shifted with clockwork efficiency. Meetings were rescheduled, Guest lists filtered through William's advisors, key documents rerouted through secure channels, entirely bypassing Camilla's office. For days, the Queen Consort remained unaware that she had effectively been erased from the plans that would define the future of the monarchy. By the time she realized the extent of her exclusion, the gates were already closed, and her fury, though controlled, radiated through the palace in subtle but unmistakable ways. Power in the palace often flows silently, but ruthlessly. Anne and William used the very structures Camilla once relied upon, transforming bureaucracy into a weapon of subtle, surgical exclusion. Digital communications were rerouted, physical memos intercepted, and sensitive meetings moved to private, secure rooms. Guest lists were scrutinized with unprecedented intensity. Anyone suspected of loyalty to Camilla was quietly removed or reassigned. William's inner circle operated with absolute devotion. They were the vanguard of a new era, following the blueprint Anne had created with meticulous precision. Senior aides from Camilla's office quickly discovered they had hit an invisible wall, polite but immovable, leaving them powerless to counteract the reconfiguration. Every move was strategic, quiet, and irreversible. The coronation planning, once a contested arena, was now firmly under William and Anne's control. For the first time in decades, Camilla was forced to confront her exclusion from the very heart of palace power. And yet, the final sentence still stands. The young guard, following the Princess Royal's blueprint, acted with a discretion so complete that it made it impossible for Camilla to mount a counter-offensive inside Clarence House. A chilling hush fell over the corridors of Clarence House, transforming the usual bustle of palace life into an unsettling, almost spectral stillness. What had begun as minor irregularities, a phone that didn't ring, a memo that never arrived, quickly escalated into a suffocating silence that signaled a far deeper shift in the machinery of power. Camilla's staff, long accustomed to their steady access to planning committees and the daily flow of privileged information, began to notice the creeping isolation. Invitations to working lunches disappeared. Daily memos became weekly, and then they stopped entirely. The signs were subtle at first, easily dismissed by anyone not watching closely, but those attuned to the palace's internal currents understood immediately. Something irreversible was happening. It was more than a logistical inconvenience. This was psychological warfare, executed with the cold precision of a master tactician. The aides who had spent years cultivating influence, building the Queen Consort's authority, found themselves stranded on an ever-shrinking island of relevance. From their vantage point, the horizon of the future stretched wide and inviting, but they were no longer being invited to navigate toward it. Anne and William were sending a message that transcended personal rivalry. The era of the consort's dominance was over. Authority had shifted, realigned not by titles or appearances, but by the quiet, unyielding force of the heir and the king's sister. The surgical exclusion was flawless. Camilla remained queen in title, adorned with jewels and attending public ceremonies, but in the spaces where the real future of the monarchy was being drafted, her seat had been removed and the door locked from the inside. In a matter of days, the institution had corrected itself, executing a maneuver of such precise efficiency that there was no room for appeal, no whisper of compromise. Anne and William had built a foundation for the next reign according to their vision, leaving Camilla to confront the stark truth. She had lost control of a game she had once thought already won. Into this carefully orchestrated void stepped Catherine, the Princess of Wales, quietly but unmistakably asserting her authority. Unlike others who might have sought to fill the space with pomp or demand recognition, she moved with effortless poise and a confidence that required no announcement. She became the quiet center of the operation, the stabilizing force around which all planning now revolved. Senior palace staff later observed that Catherine's role was anything but symbolic. She was not there to merely smile or nod. She led with a vision that balanced the ancient weight of tradition with a modern, forward-looking sensibility. Her contributions were deliberate and thoughtful. She proposed active roles for young people from across the 4 nations in the coronation procession, a move that literally placed the future generation within the most sacred moments of monarchy. She suggested ways to honour the late Queen Elizabeth II that did not feel like a ghostly reproduction, but a bridge, a melding of legacy and new purpose. Every recommendation was rooted in respect for the institution, yet sharply tuned to the sensibilities of a modern, sceptical public. The contrast between Catherine and Camilla could not have been clearer. Where Camilla's influence increasingly appeared performative or strategic, Catherine's authority radiated naturally, quietly, undeniable. She did not compete for attention, she embodied relevance, influence, and the spirit of the new era without force or fanfare. Those watching closely noted a partnership emerging between William and Catherine that was extraordinarily rare in the history of the monarchy. Where William brought the necessary strength, historical gravity, and resolve, Catherine contributed balance, foresight, and subtle elegance. They operated not through rank or command, but through shared vision and mutual respect, moving as a single, coherent force toward a future they were constructing brick by brick. Public perception responded, though subtly. After years of scandal, divisive headlines, and courtly fatigue, the people found grounding in Catherine's presence. She was polished, yet relatable, regal without aloofness, and influential without aggression. Polling within inner circles, rarely discussed openly, confirmed the trend. The public now judged the monarchy not by bloodline or title, but by character. Catherine's quiet rise symbolized trust, integrity, and stability, qualities that were rapidly eclipsing the carefully managed image of the Queen consort. Meanwhile, Camilla, despite her decades of perseverance and rehabilitation, found herself increasingly isolated. She had fought to remain seen. Catherine simply became significant. In the language of the court, silence had become the loudest assertion of power. With every strategic decision made, with every tone set behind palace doors, Catherine's influence solidified, leaving the Queen consort adrift, her role in shaping history slipping steadily out of reach. Far removed from the bustle, in the hushed stillness of Windsor Castle, King Charles felt the weight of decades pressing down upon him. He had long imagined his authority as absolute, his family united, and his legacy secure. Yet, as he surveyed the sprawling estate from a solitary window, he recognized the narrowing, unforgiving reality. The future he was building, the crown he now bore, was rapidly moving beyond the reach of his wife's influence. Camilla, the partner he had relied upon for decades, was being systematically erased from the path ahead. In response, he summoned Princess Anne to a private meeting. Her arrival shifted the room's energy instantly. There was no hesitation in her stride, no deference. She moved as a figure of decades-long preparation, a guardian of tradition, who had spent her life anticipating this moment of reckoning. Charles, carrying the tremor of emotional urgency, attempted to appeal to her on behalf of loyalty. Decades of patient public rehabilitation and personal devotion. He pleaded for recognition of Camilla's service, insisting that she not be cast aside after a lifetime of enduring scrutiny and scandal. "She is my wife," he reportedly said, the words hanging like a fragile tether in the tension-filled air. But Anne did not waver. Her response was deliberate, calm, and irrevocably final. She did not question Camilla's character, nor the efforts that had been made on her behalf. Instead, she spoke in the language of the institution, a lexicon of duty, hierarchy, and historical continuity that even the king could not ignore. She reminded him, with unwavering clarity, that the monarchy does not belong to those who merely wear the crowns. It belongs to the history that precedes them and the future that must follow them. "He is our future," Anne said, referring to William. The statement was not merely a reminder of the line of succession, it was a cold acknowledgement of where the real power now resided. Anne's argument was structural, firm, and unwavering. She explained that for the monarchy to survive the modern era, The transition to William's reign had to be seen as a clean, untainted progression. Any perceived overreach by a consort, particularly one with a complicated history, risked weakening the very foundations of the throne. At a time when the public's patience was at its thinnest, she told her brother with chilling clarity and without apology that her loyalty was not to his personal happiness, but to the crown itself. She had seen the ways Camilla had begun to shape ceremonial matters, and, together with the Prince of Wales, had decided the boundary had to be drawn. Charles sat in the library, a long, uneasy silence stretching between them. The harsher reality was sinking in. His influence was no longer what it once was. He had reached the throne only to find that the most significant decisions regarding the monarchy's future were being made by his sister and his son, often without his direct input. The pageant of contradiction that Anne feared was already beginning to take shape, and she alone had the resolve to cut it away. Looking at his sister, Charles no longer saw a sibling but a guardian at the gate, steadfast and unmoved by appeals to emotion. When the conversation ended, there were no conciliatory words. Anne gave only a brief, respectful nod, a gesture of protocol rather than affection, and walked away. The weight of the crown pressed heavier than ever as Charles realized the painful truth. He had been fighting for a person while Anne fought for a 1,000-year-old idea. The meeting concluded, and with it disappeared the illusion that Charles could protect Camilla from the rising tide of the next generation. The silent storm had claimed its first major victory. He was left to navigate alone a world where every gesture was choreographed, every word measured, and the consequences of missteps could echo through history. For decades, the public had been fed carefully curated press releases and staged photographs, yet the real history of the firm was written in private. In a stunning turn of events, even the most seasoned palace insiders were left breathless. A private letter written by Princess Anne surfaced through the most discreet channels. Never intended for public eyes or even the wider royal household, it was a stark, unflinching message from a sister to a king, cutting directly to the heart of the crisis consuming the House of Windsor. The letter had been penned in the quiet hours of a cold Tuesday morning at Gatcombe Park. Anne bypassed digital security and formal secretaries, writing by hand with the discipline and precision for which she was renowned. This alone signalled the gravity of her intent. When the Princess Royal takes up a pen, it is never for a casual exchange. It is to issue a decree of conscience. The letter began by acknowledging the heavy burden of tradition inherited from their mother. Anne framed the crown not as a symbol of prestige, but as a relentless duty that demands the sacrifice of personal desires. Her warning about the present trajectory of the monarchy carried the most sting. She described it as a slow descent into what she chillingly termed a pageant of contradiction. A pageant, she argued, is a hollow spectacle, a show for an audience lacking the substance of true leadership. When appearances matter more than purpose, the foundation of the throne begins to rot from within. Though Camilla was never mentioned by name, the target of her critique was unmistakable. Anne wrote of the poison of public perception and the compromises made in pursuit of media approval, referencing the decades-long campaign to rehabilitate Camilla's image, a project she viewed as a dangerous distraction from the monarchy's true calling. To Anne, the crown exists not to be liked, but to remain stable, permanent, and a symbol of national responsibility that stands above the fickle winds of popular opinion. She warned Charles that allowing personal relationships to dictate ceremonial duties risked the one thing the monarchy cannot afford to lose, its integrity and mystery. The letter turned to the next generation. Anne described William as the last strong pillar of the family, a man capable of combining ironclad respect for tradition with a necessary vision for the future. Yet even this pillar required protection. She cautioned that overreaching influences and competing interests could fracture the monarchy under pressure. Her plea was clear. Charles must relinquish personal battles and allow William the space to define the monarchy for the 21st century. The letter reached its climax with a demand as painful as it was necessary. For the monarchy to survive, Charles had to step back from personal conflicts involving Camilla and allow William to lead. She spoke of the loneliness of the crown, a burden their mother had borne with stoic grace, and reminded him that preserving the institution often requires pushing away those closest to you. Letting go of Camilla's influence in shaping the future, in Anne's eyes, was the only way to prevent the pageant from turning into a farce. This letter became the blueprint for the surgical exclusion that followed. It gave William moral and strategic justification for his uncompromising stance. When Charles read the words, he was not merely reading the thoughts of his sister, he was witnessing the collective anxieties of the old guard and the silent hopes of the new. The struggle was never about jealousy or personal grudges. It was about saving an ancient idea from the modern world's hunger for celebrity. Anne's decisive action sent a clear message. Subtlety had passed. She had identified cracks forming in the palace walls and acted to enforce a radical realignment. The survival of the monarchy demanded the sacrifice of the personal for the eternal. Camilla, despite her decades-long journey to legitimacy, was now in quiet exile. William and Catherine had stepped into the light, shaping the moral and ceremonial boundaries of the crown before a single coronation note had been sounded. Every detail of this transition, from the careful orchestration of ceremonial duties to the subtle signalling of authority within palace corridors, underscored the seriousness of Anne's intervention. For the palace staff, long accustomed to observing rituals without question, the letter's revelation was a shock. For the public, yet unaware of the strategic battle unfolding behind closed doors, it marked only the surface of what would become an irrevocable shift in power. The consequences of Anne's intervention and William's defiance will reverberate for decades. The monarchy has evolved through deliberate assertion of bloodline discipline and institutional loyalty. The consort, once central to operations of tradition, now watches from the shadows. The seat once reserved for Camilla remains empty, a symbolic void louder than any official declaration. William and Catherine are no longer waiting for the crown. They are already defining its future. Was Princess Anne's action a necessary safeguard for the monarchy, or a cold betrayal of a woman who had finally earned recognition? Has the firm become too rigid in its pursuit of survival, or is this the only way to ensure the throne's relevance in the 21st century? The cracks in the palace walls may be invisible to the public, but the internal divide is profound, and its consequences will be felt for generations. What do you think about the Princess Royal's actions toward the Queen Consort? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below. If you found this deep dive into the hidden power struggles of the royal family compelling, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more exclusive insights into the world's most famous dynasty. The story is far from over, and we will be here to witness every secret chapter.